a very important area. The area of language assessment for migration and integration is a very important area that ALTE provides a lot of attention to. And it has to be said, with the help of Lorenzo and Cecilia in particular, we have made great progress, I think, in this area at providing documentation of relating to policymakers in this area. So I would like to welcome Lorenzo Rocca and Cecilia Hamnes Carlson to the stage, who will introduce the session, and then they will also introduce Brian North, who is also with us for this very interesting workshop, and we're looking forward to having your participation too. So Lorenzo and Cecilia, are you there? Okay, I'm not sure if they're there, but Brian, you are there.
Yes,
Lots of things. Excellent. So if we're having trouble getting Lorenzo and Cecilia on, then maybe I will hand over to you straight away then to start your presentation. So the theme of the LAMI workshop is uneven profiles, what it is and why it is important. And Brian, we're particularly glad to have you here today to kick this session off with a presentation, the introduction to the theme of uneven profiles. So we're very much looking forward to what you have to say about that. So I'll hand over to you now, Brian, to begin your presentation, and hopefully you also have control of your slides there as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Hello everybody. I'm just going to check that this actually works going forward and backwards. Yes, it does. And the point to think about is that every time you say somebody is B1, you're actually talking about it's a convenient summary of a complex profile, a complex uneven profile. And people don't want a 5-minute answer when you say, what level is your German? B1 is a more convenient answer, but it hides, an uneven profile. This is recognized with the European language portfolio, where you're asked to profile across 5 different areas. There's no global appreciation. And also with Europass, there you can't read it, but that's an example of a Europass. And there in the middle, it says that my French is kind of, for reading and listening, it's C1, and then for the other, it's B2. So what do we mean when we talk about uneven profiles? And basically, we mean several things. We mean being able to understand a language but not speak it, or being able to use spoken language but not written, and to use the language in certain domains but not others. So if we take the first point, this has been called various things at various times: receptive plurilingualism, intercomprehension, receptive multilingualism, and lingua receptiva. And it is the convention in Switzerland, when you have meetings at a national level, that everybody speaks their own language and is expected to be able to understand the others. Also, on this kind of theme, it's not a new idea to recognize uneven profiles. At the beginning of the communicative movement, with the first communicative tests, which were produced by Keith Morrow, with a specification which was part of a Council of Europe project, you were able to take separate tests for each of the 4 skills, and you got 4 different certificates if you took all 4 of them. And later in the 80s, at the Arles and Oxford preliminary and higher examinations, the Arles examinations just did listening and speaking, spoken language, and the Oxford examinations just did written language, reading and writing. So you see, at the beginning of the communicative movement, there was quite a strong presence of recognizing uneven profiles. And Cambridge also always give out a graphic profile to show the unevenness of the profile of the person concerned. Then the second aspect of what we mean by uneven profiles is to do with the quality of the language, really, or the situations in which you're able to use the language. And here a very useful distinction, particularly in relation to immigration, was made by Jim Cummins at the beginning of the 1980s, where he talked about the distinction between basic interpersonal communication skills and communicative academic language proficiency, pointing out that immigrant kids tended to get bounced out of language support programs when they demonstrated basic BICS, basic interpersonal communication skills, when what they actually need is cognitive academic language proficiency in order to pass tests in school. In terms of CFR domains, basic interpersonal communication skills is concerned with the personal domain and the playground in terms of the public domain, whereas cognitive academic language proficiency relates to the other two domains, primarily occupational and educational. And the point really is that immigrants don't need to have a very developed level in occupational and educational domain unless they're going to be a doctor, in which case they will have taken something like IELTS. In terms of the CFR, there's a very big distinction between descriptor scales, which reflect BICS, which reflect language as a natural phenomena. You know, being able to understand a person talking to you, take part in conversation, have informal conversations with friends, or repair a car or put up a shelf, as opposed to a lot of the other scales concern cognitive skills that are learnt skills that are learnt through education and training and experience at work, like reading for information and argument, addressing audiences, formal meetings, note-taking, writing reports and essays, etc. So you could say that it would not be unreasonable to say that tests for immigrants should be focusing on BICS and not CAL. And then if we turn to the CFR itself, how are uneven competencies presented in the CFR? And we'll have a look at this first in relation to the CFR in 2000, the 2001 CFR, the original, and secondly in relation to the update, the 2020 update, the companion volume. So if we look at the way that it's represented in 2001, a framework including both, meaning the CFR, a framework including both horizontal and vertical dimensions, so all these different categories, plus the scales, the levels for the vertical dimension, facilitates the definition of partial objectives and the recognition of uneven profiles. And in fact, it's stated somewhere else that this is the reason why the CFR contains so many scales, is in order to help people to develop differentiated profiles for different purposes, needs profiles. Hans-Jörg Krum was one of the first, in reaction to the publication of the CFR, pointed out that this was a really important issue in relation to immigration. And the provisional version of the CFR, which was used for piloting, actually contained a needs profile, which was based upon an earlier scale called the ELT2 scale, what was part of a discussion of this issue. But unfortunately, that got dropped in the published version in 2001 because it was considered to be too complicated. If we turn to the CFR 2020, the companion volume, the same sort of thing is said. The reason the CFR includes so many descriptor scales is to encourage users to develop differentiated profiles. Descriptor scales can be used first to identify which language activities are relevant for a particular group of learners, and then secondly, to establish which level those learners need to achieve, to accomplish in that area concerned. And there are a couple of examples of needs profiles. One is for CLIL, and the other, this is the CLIL one, and there's another one for academic, taking an academic course as an undergraduate. And if you see here that people are not expected to be able to do everything. Out of the 80 odd scales that are present in the CFR, there are on this diagram, there are about less than half of them, and the jagged edges of the graphic shows that it's not necessary to be exactly the same level in all of those things. There's another profile given in the CFR of a plurilingual proficiency profile, and you can see that in this particular case, it's not uncommon for somebody's strengths to go across languages. So this particular person is obviously very good at reading and not so good at writing, and that translates over across different languages. This is not an unusual phenomenon. But most of the time, when we talk about uneven profiles, as with the portfolio and with Europass that I showed at the beginning, one wants to restrict it to a reasonable number of categories. Otherwise, it gets out of control. So here is the example that's given in the companion volume for a profile in one language. Where you see that it's profiling overall oral comprehension, reading comprehension, oral interaction, written interaction, oral production and written production, and mediation. And it's not unusual for people to have a very uneven profile across those areas. I'm not aware of any recent research which talks about what proportion of people have a flat profile and what proportion of people have an uneven profile. But I can remember some research in the 90s which showed that in terms of writing, about 2/3 of people have a very noticeably uneven profile. So, to conclude, very few people, even highly educated people, have flat profiles. And they're not as good. They're not one proficiency level in all of the skills. They're better at some things than they are at others. This was recognized in communicative examinations during the 1980s, for English at any rate. This was particularly useful if you were, as I was, Director of Studies of a language school at that time, teaching English, because we had a lot. This was in Bournemouth, and we had a lot of students from the Middle East, and they had great. They obviously were much better. They had it because of the difficulties with the script and with things like articles, etc. They found it. They were able to demonstrate a much higher level in listening and reading than in writing, or a much higher level in relation to ARLS, the listening and speaking exam, rather than the Oxford exam, which was reading and writing. So the presence of these examinations, which separated out the skills in this way and enabled them to get a certificate, which would attest their proficiency level in the spoken language, was a great benefit to them. And the purpose of the CFR scales is to facilitate creating differentiated needs profiles in this way. And finally, as an immigrant, and I'm speaking from personal experience, having first of all moved to Switzerland and now having moved to Italy, as an immigrant, you need to have a considerably higher level of listening and speaking than you need reading and writing. And writing really is the last skill that you need, because you can always get somebody else to help you to do it. So that's the message basically from the CFR, that the suggestion that one should take account of these issues in designing tests in general, and that it is particularly relevant when you're talking about tests which may be used for immigration, permanent residence, or citizenship. Thank you very much.